I don't even see where they're. There they are. We're going to start. These guys are great, and I don't think we need to introduce Ms. Tina Brown. Larry can do a little bit of that, but she's and Larry Kramer, who founded CBS MarketWatch and has gone on to even more amazing stuff. He's now on the board of Discovery Communications. Is it Discovery Communications or Holdings? Communications. Various startups at Polaris Venture Partners. We don't really have a format here other than to let them talk about things that are of interest to them and hopefully of you. And I think afterward there's going to be some more stuff upstairs still. So, but I can't bet on that. So you can go as long as you want. We love audience questions, and so Larry, at some point, ask people to put up their hands. It's all on the record. It's being filmed. You'll be able to watch it on YouTube, on the Monaco Media channel in the future, forever. And so with no further ado, I bring you Ms. Tina Brown and Mr. Larry Kramer.
Hi, everybody. This is a nice setting, isn't it? A bar. Journalists feel very at home at bars.
Frank Sinatra, the street.
We're going to do this conversationally, and we will take questions. Actually, if you have questions during the time we're talking, and we've raised something that you think needs to be challenged or questioned, feel free to wave your hand a little bit and yell out or something, and we'll interrupt because we don't have any prepared script here. I've known Tina for a while. We met at a dinner a couple of years back. Harry was there and my wife was there. But I've really gotten to know her better in the last several months. Just as a favor some friends came over and talked to her when she was starting to put together the Daily Beast, which we'll talk about in a minute. It's her new site. And most of you know her previous stops, and so I won't go through the whole list, but they're quite well known. She's run several magazines, Vanity Fair and The New Yorker, in New York for Condé Nast, a company I'm doing some work for now. And she's really, everywhere she goes, she leaves a trail, quite an interesting trail. Every magazine she's gone to has been vastly improved from where it was before she took it over. What we just figured out, not 5 minutes ago, is she's a month into this new venture, and entirely new for her to go onto the web. And she founded the Daily Beast literally a month ago. The first statistics from Omniture, which is one of the measuring, as most of you all know, Omniture measures traffic on the web, told her that in her first month they had 2.3 million uniques and 11.5 million page views. And we realized that that's actually the largest publication she's ever been in charge of. So congratulations on that. All right, so let's just get into it. You've worked in every form of media you can. You've written newspaper columns, you've run magazines, you've had television shows. The web is this entirely new medium, still developing in its infancy, and here you are again. You've got an enormous amount of energy. I love that about you. It shows on the site. What got you into this? What's new about this? How does it stack up against all these other forms of media you've been in?
Well, first of all, it's very exciting to be here because I feel as a kind of new kid on the block to be part of this kind of, swirling, sea of far more experienced internet players is kind of a thrill for me. I'm having a very good time this evening meeting all these new faces. So thanks very much to the Monaco Media Forum for inviting us here. Well, first of all, this venture that I'm in was actually the idea of Barry Diller several years ago. And he asked me if I would be interested in starting up a site that really kind of curated the very best stuff out there, simply because as a consumer, he felt that he was overwhelmed with material, felt that he really wanted a sensibility that he trusted to tell him basically what to read every day, like a smart friend sending an email saying, have you seen this? And I was actually about to write my book at the time on the Diana Chronicles, and I couldn't do it because I said, look, I'm just starting this book, and the timing is out of joint. And he said, well, I'll wait for you to finish. So I laughed, and I thought, well, that's very nice of him to say that, but of course he won't. But sure enough, after I finished the book, he did come back, and he hadn't started it in the meantime. And he said, I still want you to do this idea. I'd love you just to give it a go. So I said, well, why don't I come in and sort of kick some ideas around and see if you like what we kind of pilot out. And if you do, maybe we'll do it. And if we don't, maybe I won't want to do it either. But we can at least see what it's like. And I thought that would be a very interesting way for me to get to know the web and understand it a little bit, because I didn't know enough, I felt, and wanted to. Well, within a few months, really, it became clear that, first of all, I loved doing it. Secondly, he did very much like what we showed him. And he said, let's just do it. And so he said, go out and find a general manager and let's get this thing going. And thrillingly, I met Caroline Marks, who's sitting there, who was from Comcast, and she is a very brilliant GM, and she immediately understood the opportunity there, and we built the site very quickly. In about 9 or 10 weeks, we got the site up, because the goal was to get this thing up before the election was over, because it's a wonderful way to find an audience when there's such an appetite for news. And what we did was we've created a site that is that has at its core this curated list of material where we find the 10 things every day that we think that you should read, see, look at, hear, and at the same time create our own original content that goes with it, which brings the kind of excitement and the new and the buzz about it, because without that original content, it's hard really to create the excitement around an aggregated site, if it's new, when there are so many other players in that space already. So we put it up, and it must say, the exciting part was it has sort of taken very quickly. It was the right thing, I think, to just say we did not want to have a marketing budget. We really only wanted to use content as the marketing budget. That news is the best marketing thing to have, because if you have stories which catch on and which make their own, find their own audience, then of course it's a far better way of kind of promoting a site, because it's real, it's organic. It means people are coming to you because they've heard something's interesting and are coming to you for that reason. And I think that starting at that time was a great idea, because there was so much news between the financial meltdown and the political excitement. We very fast have found an audience.
The name of the site, it comes from an Yves Lenoir novel, and the novel's name is Scoop. How important is, in this medium, which is an immediate medium, how important are scoops to what you do now compared to what you've done in the past?
Well, I was very concerned when I thought about the site, because I thought that, I know enough about magazines to know that scoops are important, that news is the energy. And I thought, how are we going to generate that, with a tiny sort of, not a big news budget and no sort of actual writers on staff. But what I've learned about the web, which I find very exciting, is the one kind of journalism I couldn't really do with either weeklies or monthlies is what I call the interpretive scoop. It's the scoop of an idea. It's the fast reaction or putting into the conversation a new idea, which actually on the web takes with immense speed. And it's almost as if intellectual content has had this fabulous new regeneration, I think, with the web, because ideas have always been thought to be kind of dry. Who wants to hear about sort of political thoughts or whatever? Those things don't have a big audience. Well, guess what? If you have the right idea at the right time, it can catch on like wildfire, I've found, which I'm sure is clear to everybody here anyway. But from my point of view, I found this was a very exciting way to make news, that you can have a piece. We had a piece, for instance, by it was Reagan's former speechwriter, Jeffrey Hart, just pitched a piece and said, I'd like to write about how Obama is the new Reagan. Well, he just sort of wrote it. It was 700 words. I mean, the thing got 150,000 hits. It was really incredible. Whereas if you had published that in something like what would have been its natural surround in past generations, it probably would have appeared, in Harper's Magazine or The Atlantic or the New Republic, and it wouldn't have had half that audience and none of that kind of sizzle around it.
So what does that mean for the kind of people you've had to hire and bring into this? The traditional journalists have their way of doing things. The writers who wrote for you at New Yorker had a pace and had a way of doing it, and you asked them to do things, to take time, to really go after it. Every other medium has never had this kind of speed. Do you have to hire people, different kind of people for this? Are people getting it? Are there old media people who are popping into it and getting it?
Well, I do find that, having obviously edited actually 4 magazines, because Tatler in London as well, and then I have my talk show and so on, I know so many writers. I've swum in the world of writers all my life, really last 30 years. And so the great thing is the way to get it done, I've found, is you have to know what people are interested in. And if you know writers well, you know the things that turn them on. You know what gets them excited. So the trick is to go to the right writer with the right subject. And if you can turn that writer on with the subject he's interested in, he will sit down and write it very quickly. Because in fact, he's kind of bursting to say it, but nobody asked him.
So they're engaging. This is just them writing what their first draft
Yeah.
would have been and giving it to you.
Sure.
Is it the are there other different characteristics about the stories themselves? So the story you want, you mentioned in something I read, and this happened to me the one time, both times I wrote for you, when somebody asked me, one of your editors said, "Would you write something for us? We need it today."
Right. And
so you turn it around, and it took 2 hours for me to write something. I think you made a comment about doing the same thing. You wrote your column in 2.5 hours, and is it a different kind of column than you would have written if you had taken 2 weeks? What's different about the writing? Does the writing matter less and the punch matter more?
Well, as a matter of fact, I think the thinking is almost more as important as the writing. Maybe that's always true, but I think that you have to have a very clean, strong point of view to write successfully for the web. The pieces do have to be punchier. The pieces do have to be shorter. They have to get to the point quicker. So there certainly is a kind of writer who maybe doesn't write as well because they're more leisurely, they're more kind of long, sort of 7 or 8 paragraphs of sort of scene setting. That doesn't really work on the web. I want to feel that we can do long narrative journalism on the web. I haven't seen it done hugely successfully, though I think Bloomberg is starting to do it with Norman Pearlstein very successfully. They've done some longer pieces. They had the piece on Dick Fold, which I was just talking to Norman about, wherever he is, that was 6,000 words and got a lot of traffic, which I'm excited to hear, actually, because I think I haven't really felt that long pieces do work as well. But I'm still very encouraged about the kind of pieces that you can do. And I'm right now completely in love with this kind of anti-received opinion, sort of smart interpretive point of view stuff, where you can deliver an idea with punch and have it come right off the news or sort of forecast the news. That at the moment I'm finding very satisfying. Now maybe that soon I'll start to really be trying to think about how to crack the narrative form. I don't frankly think it's as easy.
Yeah, this is a different medium. This is a medium where every form of media can exist on it: video, audio, text, still pictures. All of it could be mixed in if you wanted to. Do you think you'd be moving toward a new form of storytelling where you're adding those things into the devices sooner because they get to the point faster sometimes?
Yes, but I'm also love the whole kind of visual and interactive piece of this too, because obviously that's an area where you can have an enrichment that you couldn't have in magazines. I mean, to be able to produce a slide gallery of, the Obamas first, the intimate moments of the Obamas, it got tremendous amount of traffic because they were wonderful pictures and you could just turn through them. They were so exciting. And video, we're doing very well with our video and comedy mashes and putting up the things that we found all over the web. Our video cheat sheet is doing very well to the point that we've moved it higher up on the page. So what is very exciting is, although there are some things that you can't do, which I like doing, like the longer pieces and like the sort of the pieces that took 6 weeks to report, these other enriching aspects, like video, like the instant slideshows, like the interpretive scoops, those things are so incredibly exciting that, it feels to me right now that this is a form that can endlessly evolve.
Right. Taking more time and doing a story still will be important on this. I agree.
Yes.
In what I've seen on some of the better websites that are really researching this, there's sort of a layered approach to how you report something. In the newspaper world, I remember when I was at the Washington Post, every couple of days we'd have one of these stories that started in the bottom corner of the front page, and you'd open it up and there'd be 4 pages of why the police department in Prince George's County is corrupt. And the reality was 5% at best of the audience would read that entire story. Most of the people were glad you did it. Most of the people were glad they could see the 4 pages and, oh, they nailed it. Thank God the Washington Post is here watching my police department for me. But I really got to read the sports section, and I only have a half an hour. And so they want it done. In the web, you don't have to knock down the trees and print the pages. You can allow the depth of reporting to appear, and you can peel away as much as you want or not.
Well, that's right. I mean, we've also got a new sort of way of doing that stuff too, which is we've called this module, we've called it the big fat story. Now, every day we have something we call the big fat story, and it's the story into which you do the big deep dive, except that instead of running it as one long narrative, we break it out into its different aspects so that you'll have here is the, in this section you can read about the major players. In this section you can read about the backstory. In this section you can read about what everybody thinks about the story. So it's a kind of wraparound that is, in a way, I feel, our sort of answer to the big, long investigative piece that would be 6 pages in the Washington Post. I mean, I'm a big lover of investigative journalism, and I want to see. That's the one thing I want to see more of online, and somehow we have to figure out a way to crack it, because I think that is of such value that I would hate to feel that media companies kind of stop doing that particular form, because it is so vital. And thank God we have things like the Washington Post willing to do it, and the Times, wonderful series on the Reckoning, for instance. It's the kind of stuff that's reflective, that takes a long time to report.
Well, then that brings up the journalism aspect, brings up another interesting point. I'm not sure, if this is as big a problem on your side or as others, but there's a blurring of the lines of what's journalism. There are bloggers. The word blogger gets used broadly, and frequently the first information you get about something, or early information you get about something, is done not by a professional journalist, but by somebody who just observed something. Now, obviously, if it's an explosion and you're there with your camera phone and you've taken the picture, there's a reason you're there. If not, and you've just submitted something, or you've passed on something, and you don't have the same standards that a journalist operates under, and maybe your reason, going to the very reason you're doing the story, you might have a vested interest in something. Do you worry at all about journalistic standards suffering in this world where we're pointing to outside to so many things?
I do worry, and our site doesn't just simply take, the user-generated content that we use is absolutely sort of judged. I mean, it's not just, we're not just putting up anything that comes in. We do want to have, a feeling that it's gone through, being looked at and kind of signed off on. That's just simply the model that I feel the most comfortable with. I would not feel comfortable just posting stuff that just comes in.
For the reasons we said.
For the
because
reasons
a lot
we
of
say.
sites do that now.
Yeah, they do, and I think it's fine if that's how they're advertised, if you know what I mean. But I don't think I don't want to have real journalism, which has adhered to certain standards of rigor, somehow coexisting with material that has not gone through the same kind of rigor, because I think that in the end, the lowering of standards rubs off on the stuff that has had that rigor. And I frankly, that from our point of view, that's part of our brand.
Right. By and large, over the last 10 years, the most successful new websites, content websites, have not come from the traditional media companies. There have been exceptions. The New York Times website's quite good. The Wall Street Journal is quite good. There are some, but the best of the new breeds of sites that really understand the web, they've been unable to hatch many of them within the traditional media companies. You and I have worked in both of those. I have my own thoughts on that. What are yours? Why do you think it's been a problem?
I've come to think that it's actually much harder to take an existing mainstream media brand and turn it into a kind of nimble website. I think there have been some terrific successes. I think that actually CNN is really having a great success right now. I think the New York Times is a superb site. But so it can be done, but it's much harder. I think it's because of the whole baggage of the original brand. Everybody's a custodian of it. You have all these internal blocks, and everybody's guarding their turf, and all the things that in a way make a website such a kind of living, breathing entity if it's begun from scratch. There are all these barriers of entry when you have a company that already exists, and everybody's trying to kind of protect that original core brand. So I think we're going to see more and more, in a way, the mainstream media sort of realizing that in a way they can't sort of do that with their existing brands, and they almost have to go off and start a kind of cousin brand that is kind of up from scratch, which has the flavor of the other one, but isn't actually trying to replicate it. I think it's harder to do.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, Esther.
This has been a wonderful discussion, but the thing that you need for investigative journalism is money.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you want to talk about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had next question I was going to ask was a financial one. Every other medium you've worked for have had multiple revenue streams. They charge for it, and they have advertising.
Right.
And even with that, they're all in trouble right now.
Right.
They're all suffering. We're all laying off. I do think in some cases we got a little bloated. I looked at, I was worried about the Washington Post having to do some cutbacks and buyouts, and they've done several. And when I went to talk to some people over there, when I worked there in the 70s, in the early 80s, the newsroom had 550 people, and now they're cutting down to 750 from where they were. So even though they have cut back from where they've been in the last 5 or 10 years, who's to say what the right number is? And so I don't know what those people were all doing necessarily. But more on point, though, we don't charge for things on the web, generally speaking, Journal being the big exception. And you're about to start to put advertising in there. Do you ever think you'll actually charge money for people to go to the site? I understand why not to in the beginning, but...
I don't think that the charging model can, once you've given people something online openly like that, I don't think you can do it. You can charge. But I do think that advertising is going more and more to the web. I think that it is going to become more and more present there. And I think in a funny way, we're just in this transitional moment in the culture where we simply have to believe that is the way it's going to be. Because it definitely is happening, but it's almost like we're in the kind of media equivalent of the Industrial Revolution, where people are still have one foot in the old way of doing things. And obviously you have to have patience, vision, and someone who believes enough to finance it. Certainly Barry Diller does very much believe in this model. When you asked about investigative journalism, that of course does take money. I think that has to be undertaken by the big mainstream media companies that we've talked about. And really what I meant was, I hope very much that those mainstream media companies don't think, well, we're all going to go into the web now, which means we're going to cut our budgets for investigative journalism. I think they have to invest as much as they ever did in online journalism and make it as every bit as strong and as rigorous as their newspapers were, which I think is crucial, obviously, for this sort of functioning democracy to have it and to maintain it. And if they won't, then I think that journalists are somehow going to have to figure out new models. I mean, maybe it is going to be some kind of fundraising issue where you go and you create sort of trusts and you I know that Paul Steiger, I don't know whether he's here, but he's done that, I think, with ProPublica, and I think it's a fabulous model, and I hope it very much that it succeeds, because we all have to now think of ways to protect that kind of journalism.
Investigative journalism has always had problems because it's frequently challenged the institutions that do fund journalism. The smaller the paper is you work on, the more you realize that writing a bad story can cost the paper a lot of money. And the good papers, of course, let you do it anyway, but there weren't that many of them going throughout history. I'm very optimistic about it. I do think that what we've proven on the web recently is that all content is not a commodity. There are certain kinds that it is a commodity, but that good content will draw viewers and therefore will draw advertisers and people will pay for it. Investigative reporting is good content. There is interest in it. People do want to read it. So we have to believe that you'll be able to do it, and there'll be enough people who want to read investigative reports that will be able to fund it either through the advertisers who want to reach those people or through charging them.
I'd like to see, Pulitzers for web journalism, because I think that once you start to really motivate media companies and journalists, for doing the investigative journalism online with, all the kind of accolades that go with, and prizes and kudos that goes with having those investigative journalism 10-page things in the Washington Post, that you might start to see it happening more.
How much time do you think Barry will give you? How much before you have to start worrying about making money?
Well, he has vision. I have, in the end, there is no I will give you X amount of time, but there certainly is an understanding that it will take time, and he's shown that already in his career when he's done things like the Fox network. What is great about Barry, he's so intelligent about what it will take. He does understand content because he does come from movies and television. He's not someone who is a financial strategist who hasn't had his hands on content. He has. He actually does understand what it takes. And the first thing he said to us was, don't try to get advertising immediately. First of all, find your audience, find your content, find your voice, then think about how you're going to go out and monetize it. But the most important thing was to find that audience. So the great thing from our point of view is that we're already ahead in terms of our plan, because we've actually found an audience far faster than we did expect. So maybe that will also mean we have expected to monetize it faster, but who knows?
You write books, you've edited magazines. long term, what are the implications for them and what's happening? I mean, it is, even though it's a different medium and you can tell the difference in what you're doing here, it's still fighting for people's time, just like anything else. I'm spending more time reading things on a computer or reading things quickly. It does have an impact on what do I want to read about that very same subject a week later or a year later. Are those industries in trouble?
I think it's very, very difficult to be in magazines right now, but I actually think that probably you have to be counterintuitive about it, because, I mean, magazine editors are going to feel I have to be faster paced, I have to be shorter, I have to do these things which will get the, quote, web, attention span. Actually, it's probably better to do it the exact opposite. I mean, given that, we've been talking about the longer narrative journalism doesn't really thrive so well online at the moment, it's really important that magazines, therefore, do those kind of stories, but do them with amount of imagination and flair so that you actually do capture people and bring them in, and then perhaps use their websites to continue the conversation and the dialogue around those stories. I have to say that I see no real sense in magazines which have this glorious content, sort of putting it up online for free the day before they're even on the newsstand, and I wonder what makes them feel they should do that. I mean, I know that they're anxious about getting the story, as it were, picked off by the media. But nonetheless, just to give people a whole sort of 10,000 word piece, putting it up before it's even, the trucks are rattling around the country, not even unloading the magazine yet, it just doesn't seem to make any sense.
There's a lot of confusion about that. I mean, I think it started with newspapers. And newspapers fought, when they built websites, fought breaking news on the website because they were afraid it would hurt the impact of the newspaper several hours later. They've all ultimately gotten over that, and they break stories when they break. But I think magazines and books are a different story. It's not really about breaking news. It's a different medium. And I think they are trying everything. Vanity Fair, actually, I think in Italy, or one of the foreign countries, is publishing weekly now.
Yes,
and trying to see if that makes a difference. I mean,
it's very hard.
And I don't think anybody's got the answer, but it has to ultimately have impact, don't you think?
It does have a lot of impact. I think that they're going to have to probably figure out less expensive ways to do it. I mean, one of the things that's very expensive for magazines are these sort of huge kind of photo shoots, and there's a lot of kind of the high quality of a magazine like Vanity Fair is costly to do. But I wouldn't want to have that problem right now. I think it's very difficult.
You're the queen of Buzz. Buzz is your middle name. Buzz should be your nickname. We should just call you Buzz, actually.
The erstwhile queen of Buzz.
Erstwhile, that's right. I forgot. The erstwhile queen of Buzz. I'm sorry. Sign your name that way, I think it's it. How important is Buzz in the internet space? How important has it been to the launch of the Daily Beast? And is it easier or harder to get it on the web than in other forms of media?
Well, I've always thought that Buzz had a kind of bad image, unfairly so, because what I call Buzz is material that people talk about, and if it's good, they'll talk about it. So actually, Buzz is just about engaging people. Buzz is about being in the conversation, and I think that's what an editor is supposed to do, is to engage people in conversation, produce material that's provocative enough to make people want to talk. So I think Buzz is important, but I think it's important in anything you do, because unless people are interested enough to discuss it with one another, it's not a very interesting piece of content.
So it is.
It is important.
And are you getting it? I mean, is it contributing to the rapid rise?
Yes,
you think,
it absolutely is. I mean, I think what's great about the web is that sort of verbal buzz that is what magazines always used to depend on, is now been literally translated into social media and the sharing of links. And we actively do share out and post our links and encourage other websites, of course, to pick us up as we pick them up in our cheat sheet and promote what they're doing and write about what they're doing, and they do the same. So this amorphous thing, this kind of buzz, is actually now this extraordinarily rich world where people are literally linking to you and genuinely creating a sort of global conversation. So I find that an extraordinarily interesting phenomenon. Oh, I'm a total junkie already. Absolute junkie to the traffic. So, I mean, I love looking at that traffic. It's like having a fish on a hook. When you put a story up and 3 hours later you start to see that cardiogram thing happening. Wow. We have it, yes. We have, what's it called, Caroline?
The Omniture
We have the
dashboard,
Omniture dashboard. And we're always checking in it and seeing which stories are moving. No, absolutely. You want to see
Things around on the
Yes,
page?
we do. We absolutely do. If something is catching, and that's what's so exciting about it. Things catch which you didn't expect to catch, and things that you did expect to catch don't really turn people on. So it's very exciting.
We debated.
I'm sorry?
Do you change headlines?
Yes, we sometimes do. I mean, obviously, I've always loved headlines. Have been my passion all my life. So I mean, I've always wanted to write headlines that were sort of intensely engaging. But we do change them, absolutely. We think maybe this story needed a more direct, hit on a particular aspect of the story, and it can definitely change. It's very interesting.
And when you describe your audience, you say you found your audience. What is that audience? How much do you know about the audience?
Who are those people?
Who are those people? Well, they seem to be people who are very much the kind of more upscale, sort of engaged, intellectually engaged people who are the watchers of HBO and the readers of the New York Times, and you have a sense of who they are because they write to you, they comment. If you read the comments, you can see immediately the kind of people that are engaged because they're very intelligent people. I mean, they're actually sort of arguing with the sites and adding their comments and taking the stories on very often. So we do get a sense that there is an intelligent audience out there that's kind of hungry to be fed and that they're finding something, at the Daily Beast that they find
Actually,
interesting.
at 2.3 million, it's still just her friends. Yeah.
Seymour Hersh is a journalistic treasure.
Yes.
Yes, he
He did
is.
his work not for the New Yorker, but for an online publication. Given the subject matter that he covers and the credibility issues that are involved in that, how do you think he would be received as a journalist?
Today I think he'd be received in the same way. I think that, for instance, if he had done the Abu Ghraib story online, I think there would have been immediately the photo gallery to go with it. There will be the global conversation about it. I think that will be it would have been just as active. And
In fact, I think they would grow. It grows faster if
Yeah.
a story gets hit. I mean, the Times people will tell you when one of their stories really makes noise, suddenly it's around the world in seconds. It used to take. There'd be a 2 or 3 day time period where it grew in the past. That's over. Everybody knows about it now everywhere.
And I think that the credibility issue, that is a change. I mean, I think 2 years ago you would have thought, well, I need the kind of the shelter of one of the kind of mainstream media brands to kind of wrap around to give it the credibility. I think that in the last couple of years, we've seen the growth of so many interesting things. I mean, I think Politico has already got, a reputation every bit as sort of, it has authority.
Well, Seymour Hersh is a brand. I mean, the fact is now, today, because you can argue how he got there, and it was through the New York Times. He built his brand through the New Yorker and New York Times. But he is a brand, and his credibility is his credibility. There'll be varying ways people will build that credibility over time, but you can do it on the web. And yes, you can translate it from mainstream media over to the web if you've already got it and take it. And so I think that's really important. Yeah, go ahead.
I would posit that for the consumer.
Speak up.
I would posit just for the consumer, it's completely de minimis. I mean, whether you write for the web or whether you write for a magazine, it's just the way that they're consuming what you take. And I mean, I don't think anybody sits there and goes, "You should read this. This started at this publication," or "You should read this." They just care about, what was written, and maybe whoever wrote it has enough brand equity that they care about that person. Oh, this is another thing by someone that I like. But basically, it's just what it is on its own, and then.
Well, filters matter.
I think filters do matter. I mean, I think that obviously, there's no doubt that great mainstream media brands have instant heft and people pay instant attention. But I think it is changing. I mean, I think that it has changed substantially in the last 2 years. I really do, and I think that in 2 years' time, I don't think that'll be nearly as important.
New York Times or Market Watch reporters or New York Times reporters, they watch the Omniture numbers too. And Market Watch, we actually turned that on for all of our staff to see whenever they wanted to, who was reading what. And in point of fact, the thing that most moved the needle for them, and they all paid attention to it for a couple of years, was Drudge. If Drudge picked up a story, suddenly 10 times more people read it than even the New York Times could bring to the party. So there's evolving places. What Tina's doing is a little bit of what you're talking about. The fact is, everything's available on the web, so somebody's got to help me figure out what's the most important thing. What I worry about, and it's kind of related a little bit, when I grew up reading newspapers, I love the serendipity of a front page of the New York Times. So I grew up reading the New York Times and the New York Post, and they had two different things for me. What the Times represented to me was I usually knew what 5 of the 7 or 8 stories I knew about them before I got the paper that morning. But there'd always be a couple stories in there that I would have never asked for, never read, had no idea they were there, but because they put it on the front page, wild coyotes roam Connecticut, I would look at it and read it, and it would be this wonderful reward, or it would teach me something. And it was only because of its proximity and only because of that. And I worry that we're losing that so much of the web is search driven, and so much of the web is, here's your list of 10 things, you're doing it. So what you're doing is very valuable to me in that you are still taking a sensibility, you are still pulling things out.
Well,
but
that
there's
was
enough of that happening.
Well, no, that was the goal, because I think the mosaic of a newspaper and the calibration of news values is very, very important for sort of enjoyment and discernment. On our cheat sheet, as we call it, which is our 10 things, it is very much a serendipitous list. It isn't just here are the 10 headlines and it's just the same things that you see everywhere, that it's Bernanke this and it's, the meltdown. But we obviously do want to have the core essential pieces, but we also are going to have an interesting cultural story or a piece from the London Guardian or a piece from something about India. And I think that's where the sensibility, serendipity is important. And I absolutely agree that is the joy of a newspaper, that you're roaming through and you suddenly get an idea and you're enchanted by something and think, wow, and your head starts to kind of imagine what it's like to be that person in another world.
You actually forget how valuable that is. I mean, I'll give you a really bizarre example of it that isn't even news related. When we were starting Market Watch, one of the first, I was looking to hire some employees. We actually were doing a sports thing at the beginning of Market Watch too, so there was a little bit of a sports angle. And we had a product called Data Sport, and I needed to hire an office manager. And we put in ads in the paper. And a woman came in, we interviewed her, and she was great, and we hired her, and she was the first hired. I said, so, what paper was it in? Where'd you see it? She said, I saw it in that paper, but actually, I didn't see it because you put it there. I saw it by accident. I said, what do you mean? She said, I cut out a number of places that looked interesting to me and that I was going to, that might be places I'd want to apply. And somebody opened the door, and it all sort of flew up onto the floor, and I had to pick them all up. And you were on the back of one of them. And it had sports in it, so I kind of looked at it and
that sounds like
and
Harry
read
Potter or something.
it was just a wonderful, one of those, it's obviously an absurd example, but it's an example of the things that are harder to do in this medium. And I feel the same way about this sort of mix. As a newspaper editor, we always worried about the mix of stories you want to know and stories you need to know. And the kind of how do we mix that up in this world,
I think the homepage can do some of that stuff. I mean, I think the only thing I will say about the Omniture drug is that, you don't want to kind of only have the things that really give you the traffic, because the overall brand will need a mix of things. I mean, I'm quite aware that, some sort of slightly highbrow piece of economics is never going to get the same kind of traffic as a Jennifer Lopez piece, but nonetheless, you do want both things there in order to create the DNA of the overall brand.
Yeah, I've had my back to the side. I'm sorry. Why don't you go?
So, Tina, I saw you on TV somewhat recently, and you had said something very interesting about being online and how it has freed you up, and I'm going to be egregiously misquoting you, but something about being able to break rules and do things completely differently online. Now, I come from the blogosphere, and I know how it's a Pandora's box, quite frankly. Could you just elaborate a little bit more on that? Because I remember when I heard you say that, I was thinking, oh my God, it is quite, it's a landmine in many ways.
You mean, I can't remember what irresponsible comment I made.
As compared to print, and how it was a great, it was in some ways freeing for you. You could also break rules.
That it was good to break the rules and.
Well, it is great just to be responsive. I mean, that's what I love about it, and not to have to, and to be able to try voices. That's the thing I most like. That's where I can break the rules. It's like, it's not, when you have a magazine, you have a finite number of pages, and you have to continually weigh, whether you want to give over your pages that week or month to this particular, experiment with a writer. And people will come at you and they say, I really want to do this piece about, I don't know, the Monaco Media Forum or whatever it is, and you think, well, it's a great idea, yes. And then you think, but wait a minute, I've got this thing, and maybe I can't because I've got this other thing. And, it's all about, can you fit it all in? it's very confining at times from making you experiment. And I love the fact that with the web you can say, that person sounded interesting, let's give it a go, let's see what he has to say. And then you can find new voices all over the place. And I think that's a wonderful way that you can liberate talent. And it's the thing I'm most enjoying, actually, about it.
Can be good, yeah.
Tina, you describe yourself as a curator of web content. I think there are probably a number of people in this room whose business plans are oriented around curation or aggregation of content on the web. How far evolved do you think the science is today of web curation? Who do you think does it well? What are your ambitions for your site as we have more data, get better at it? Who do you think does it in an innovative manner that you look to as a good web curator?
Well, I think obviously with the volume, it is essential to have curating talents. I think they can be high-low. I think they obviously Drudge is an amazing curator in a sense of in a way. I mean, I see him much more of a curator than I do an aggregator because he has an extraordinarily he has a great eye for the tabloid straight for the navel, interesting story. He just does. He's underestimated in that regard. So I do see him more of a curator than an aggregator. I think actually Real Clear Politics has done a very good job on aggregating opinion, and I think they've actually in their curation they've actually in themselves been able to create a sense that they are a place of rigor. That to be there. What you were saying before about where things come from, it doesn't really matter. I consider an opinion piece, if it shows up on Real Clear, is going to be worth reading. It may have come from some obscure, small little local newspaper or something, but if it got there, then that's enough for me to think this is really worth reading. So they, I think, do things really well. I mean, I actually have to say that I think TMZ does a great job of right down the other end of the scale, of being completely smart about picking up the kind of great dross out there that people want to plow through. I mean, that's what I think is the glory of the web, is that everybody can look at things through their own lens. And, as long as you have an eye and a gut, you can make something very, very, very individual, actually.
Yeah, back there.
Well, that's why the sharing of social media and links, which I said, is so important. I agree. I mean, a lot of people are finding our stuff by never coming to the homepage, but they're on other people's sites.
You're making it you're arguing one point over the other. The argument I hear, I think, is to do both.
Serendipity argument is what I'm getting at. Is that serendipity no longer comes as much as by going to a authoritative source.
Sure.
It comes organically and socially. Right?
Sure. I mean, I think sites like Dig have done a fabulous job with that. Mm-hmm. I really do. No, I think I absolutely agree with you. I do, but
And you'll see most major sites they also will highlight what's most read, what's most emailed. I mean, they're small parts of the same point. Obviously, if people felt that was important enough to email it to somebody else, that's a message. Or in social medium sites, the wisdom of crowds matters more than it used to because you can get it now. And there are some things I think people would rather have that, whether it's what movie to see or what hotel I want to stay at, or a lot of the travel related things that you'd like to know what people who you know and like have done and stayed there, and that's a filter you'd rather have. Some people want a movie critic who they know they like or don't like, and they'll want his opinion either because they know it'll be the opposite of theirs or it'll be the same. So I think we all have to set those things. The important difference here is you can set up a social network can help you do what you're talking about doing. There are several ways to do it, and I think a lot of people are doing it. I think what we're more worried about here is not to lose the value of what certain kind of journalism can also do, and to have people devoted and knowledgeable about certain areas who are really scholarly in them or who have been in them. A lot of the people who write for Tina's site are valuable because at one time or another they were doing what the people they're writing about are now doing. So they bring a different perspective to it.
They do, but there's also, I mean, we will take pieces from, that just come in that we just think are really good. I mean, and also we're thrilled when we show up on Dig and we also aggregate from all those sites. I mean, we don't make, for instance, any distinction, which some sites do, between, this is an op-ed piece in a paper or this is a blog. I mean, as far as we're concerned, all content is out there, whether it's user-generated, whether it's, somebody's blog, or whether it's, an op-ed piece in the New York Times. As far as we're concerned, all of that shows up on our cheat sheet. So, I mean, I think that part of what we do is to also aggregate. For instance, we do stuff where we will kind of cull the message boards. We did a really interesting piece where we went into all the kind of sort of mommy blogs and women's blogs to cull interesting message board material from users about how women were feeling about this economic collapse and what impact it had on marriages, for instance. And so we just culled that. We got like 20 very, very interesting user-generated messages and put them up on our site as a feature. So I think that the joy of this is that you can do all of it, that you can go to the best user-generated content and not necessarily focus on the rest. But at the same time, these other sites, like StumbleUpon and Dig and so forth, also have a fantastic value and which are sort of rich in content, which hopefully a site that aggregates can also kind of pluck from. So I don't actually feel that it's a kind of either-or situation at all. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Oh, absolutely, of course.
No reason not to.
Absolutely. I think that absolutely. If we put something on the cheat sheet, we absolutely say where it came from, what they said, and we very often write about the way the site did it. Like, this is a great piece that we found in X or by so and so. Absolutely.
Before we get to the next question, let me ask one. What do you do during the day on the web? Where do you, what sites do you go to? How do you use the web? Do you shop on the web?
I do, actually. Yes, I do. Particularly shoes. Shoes in my killer.
So what sites do you, besides Manolo?
Well, I mean, I'm just a news junkie, so I will go to all the news sites. I mean, I'll go to CNN and I'll go to, I go to Politico, I go to HuffPo, I go to, I'm a total political junkie, so I'm all over the political
you
sites.
do everything else? Do you bank on the web? Do you do all of those things?
My husband does that, banking on the web. I don't do my own banking on the web. It is absolutely true, but I do a lot of shopping on the web.
Interesting. Okay, yeah. Well, not verses. Don't say verses. All right.
Because I think that we're overwhelmed with data, and I mean, a whole point of it. I mean, the whole kind of editorial credo of our site is that we do that. We don't put everything up. Our site is all about a small number of things every day, and that happens to be the idea that we have. And there are many other sites that do very different things, but this is something that we feel a need for, and so we are servicing it. And I have no. I think it's fantastic that the other sites are doing it that way, but it's just not what we're doing. I think it's
about filtering. I mean, there's so much more out there now that's available to anybody that I think people still crave filtering, and how they crave it and in what form is changing. But because the content itself is changing, so much is available on the web. There's an interesting example of the value of both. I work with a company called Answers.com. They have two key sites. Answers.com itself, which is you ask a question and you get an answer that comes from 160 different sources that are, encyclopedias where they've paid for the content and they're putting it up, and it's all been vetted. It's all, it's high journalistic standards, the whole thing. You get real answers. The second site they operate is Wiki Answers, where it's been almost everything's been contributed from external sources, from people, from the audience themselves. And they're both enormously popular. Wiki Answers is larger than Answers.com right now. In fact, it's growing much faster. But both are valuable. The response we get from people is at different times and different ways they like to see both. Sometimes they like to compare the answers of both. I think this is all about trying to help people filter. The way they filter, look at how it's changed over the last 20 years. I mean, people who like politics or news have been able to filter it several different ways. People watch the Fox News channel with a point of view. And they'd rather have that point of view, or they'd rather know if they don't believe that point of view, they'd like to see what people who do believe it. So you choose to use that filter or not. You choose to go to CNN, you choose to go to the New York Times. This is just another way, and it's trying to recognize the fact that all this is out there for you, and nobody has enough time to read it all. So how do you, it's just trying to help. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Whatever you want.
That last question put me in mind of something that I hadn't thought about before, which is, it sounds odd, but is journalism different from a car? You would never think that anybody could put together a great car, a great automobile, from freely available material. A great automobile has to be edited or curated.
Well, except that I do think that there's a wonderful amount of great material that's bubbling up from people that you've never heard of, or who it's what I particularly love from the user gen point of view. Actually, is just the amount of expertise that's sort of out there in the world that that just comes bubbling out when you run a story. You hear from people who you never expected to hear from, who have a new fact or can fact check, which I think is one of the great things I must say about journalism online, that even though there is irresponsible journalism, there's also an equally voluminous cadre of people who will immediately fact check it. I mean, I find that terrific. We've run pieces that we've fact checked within an hour and totally changed 6 or 7 facts in it, and been glad to be corrected, and up it goes more correct, so that in some ways you can also constantly refine content and really keep on supplying users with really accurate material.
The question I was getting at, which really confounds me because I've been on all sides of this issue, is, look 5 years out. Forget about this transitional period we're in. Look 5 years out based on both your experiences, all of our experiences. Do you think this ends up as a world where anything and everything goes, and everything is kind of at a value neutral state? Or does it end up in a place where there's broad public recognition that a set of professional filtering mechanisms will be transcended?
I mean, I definitely think it's changing. I don't think I don't think it goes all the way to one way or not. I think people value, they have new sets of information and they will value that information. I'll give you an example from the 90s, when this all started. Yahoo Finance was an enormously popular site in the early to mid 90s when it was just first coming up. And there was at the same time a huge number of people who were investing by themselves without a broker for the first time on online financial news sites. Yahoo News was run not by news people, but by aggregators. And they mixed in press releases and news stories. They would come into the same filter. You'd call up under a stock's name, and there would be headlines. And half the headlines were written by the PR people for the company. The company would release a report on their earnings, and it would say, revenues up 80%. And people would run out and buy the stock. And then the news stories would come up about 2 minutes later, and they'd say, no profits, and the things that a news organization would do. The difference would become obvious fairly quickly. A lot of people got burned over a 4 to 5 year period, trusting things that were on the internet that looked like news that weren't news. Over time, they began to, you learn. And you learn there is a value to a press release. You want to see that release when it comes out. Once you know how to value it, how to use it, you know not to leap immediately, to read through it, and then the reporter's version comes in. You're doing the same thing the journalist is doing in that case, because for the first time in history, you've had access to that press release. the whole reason press releases existed were they went to the press, hoping the press would write a story, and we, as the press, filtered everything. We're not the overall filter anymore, but we are still a filter, and we're going to have to be a filter in order to help. So the trick is, over the next several years, how do people understand each of these things, and how do they play out? And I just think it's a moving target. I don't think they disappear. I think you will trust certain sites for certain things. You will learn what works for you. And if it could be simple as a blogger who writes about a subject you know about, and you realize he's dead on every time he writes, you follow that blogger from that point on. And any columnist can do what they want, but that's who you think is on. You'll learn that. I don't think it's any different than anything else. Yeah.
One thing that's really interesting to me is that the demand for content has increased exponentially in the last 10 years. But the talent necessarily increased, right? Are we producing more Tina Browns? Are we producing more great writers than we were? How do we live in this world where the demand for content is sort of exponentially increasing, but the talent seems to be not increasing at the same pace?
I think there's a huge amount of talent out there. I must say, I think it's the liberating thing about the web that there is so much talent, and that it can now have much easier access to people who can seek it out and find it, or indeed start their own very, very interesting blogs, which you can alight upon. I mean, I am always finding some fresh bit of talent with a blog, and I just think, my God, this person has been sitting here writing this stuff, cranking it out. It's really interesting and good. And then you can actually give it wider exposure, which again is what's wonderful about being able to aggregate, because you can suddenly start to pluck from these blogs, which people just send to you. I think there's a great deal of talent, and maybe because voices in the past have just, maybe people used to write brilliant letters, and I think they probably did actually, and we've all got people in our family who used to write amazing letters, and you just really enjoy those letters because they were so good. Now they can actually put them online, and you've suddenly got a new, exciting voice out there.
She writes wicked instant messages. They're just like, that's the new story. It's really a...
That's good.
Yeah. Well, it should be somebody who hasn't asked one. Go ahead.
As I said to you earlier, Tina, I'm a big fan of the Daily Beast, but I have a question that you may or may not answer diplomatically. Obviously, what you see is influence.
One can only hope.
Journalist. If you were offered the job of, say, like editor-in-chief of the New Yorker or Vanity Fair now, would you go back to that world with something that's extremely influential, or have you moved on completely from that whole world?
It's funny, I really would never have thought I would say this, but I've actually would not want to leave the online world now. I think it's really, really exciting. There's something magical about the multimedia nature of it, for a start. Every time I hit the play button on our video, I just feel it's so exciting to have that. I love being able to build a brand from scratch, find an audience from scratch, to be liberated from all those kind of feelings of these impositions of time and space, and the actual stress of trying to keep news alive when there's so much competition. It's much, much more fun to have something where you can respond and not feel that anxiety that your scoop is going to be stolen. All of that stuff, which is so difficult, I think, nowadays in magazines. So I actually would take. I would not prefer now to be in the world of print. I'm actually very, very excited by this new medium. Really.
Cool finish.
Thank you.